Imagine two men. One is a brilliant tech executive who helped invent a piece of Wi-Fi technology. He made millions, carried a thick stack of $100 bills, and once threw gold coins into the Pacific Ocean just for fun. The other is Ronald Read, a janitor who never earned more than minimum wage, drove a rusty truck, and wore old clothes. When the tech executive died, he was broke. When Ronald Read died in 2014, he left behind over $8 million. He had simply saved consistently, invested quietly, and let compounding do the rest. That contrast is the heartbeat of Morgan Housel's book. It is not a manual of investment formulas or a get-rich-quick scheme. It is a diagnosis of how your mind quietly works against you, and how understanding your own psychology is the real key to building lasting wealth. The core thesis of the psychology of money is deceptively simple. Doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are, and a great deal to do with how you behave. Finance is not a hard science like physics. It is a soft skill, where temperament, humility, and self-awareness matter more than technical knowledge. Housel argues that we treat money like a spreadsheet problem, but we are not spreadsheets. We are emotional, story-driven creatures whose decisions are shaped by invisible forces, our unique life experiences, our ego, our fear, and our hunger for status. The book is a tour of the psychological traps that sabotage wealth and the mindset shifts that can help us escape them. Housel unpacks this thesis by first dismantling the illusion that people are crazy with money. He points out that every financial decision makes sense to the person making it, given their personal history. Someone who grew up during a recession watching their parents lose jobs will see risk differently than someone who came of age during a boom. A low-income household spending $400 a year on lottery tickets is not irrational. For them, it is the only affordable dream of a different life. We all carry different scars and different lenses, and what looks insane to one person is perfectly logical to another. This insight is not just about empathy. It is a warning against blindly copying someone else's financial strategy without understanding the experiences that shaped it. Next, Housel introduces the twin forces of luck and risk, which he says are far more powerful than we like to admit. He tells the story of Bill Gates, who happened to attend one of the only high schools in the world with a computer in the late 1960s. That one-in-a-million stroke of luck gave him years of practice before most people had ever seen a keyboard. Then there was Gates's close friend, Kent Evans, equally brilliant and equally obsessed with computers, who died in a mountaineering accident before graduation. Same potential, opposite outcomes, neither fully in their control. The lesson is not that effort does not matter, but that we should be careful how we judge success and failure. When things go well, do not let it go to your head. When they go poorly, do not let it break your spirit. And never assume that an extreme success story is a blueprint you can replicate, because the role of luck may be invisible. This leads to one of the book's most uncomfortable truths: the danger of never having enough. Housel recounts the story of Rajat Gupta, who rose from poverty in India to become CEO of McKinsey, with a net worth of over $100 million. Yet, surrounded by billionaires on the board of Goldman Sachs, he felt small. He began passing inside information to a hedge fund manager, made a few extra million, and lost everything: his reputation, his freedom, his legacy. The hardest financial skill, Housel writes, is getting the goalpost to stop moving. Social comparison is a game with no finish line. There is always a bigger fish. The antidote is to define what enough means for you, and to protect it fiercely, because risking what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need is simply foolish. The book then turns to the quiet miracle of compounding. Warren Buffett is worth over $100 billion, but more than 90% of that wealth came after his 65th birthday. His real secret is not just skill, but time. He started investing at age 10 and has been at it for over 8 decades. Compounding is like a snowball rolling down a hill. At first, the growth is barely visible, but given enough time, it becomes a beast. Most people give up too early because they underestimate the power of good returns sustained over a very long period. You do not need to chase the highest returns. You need to earn decent returns and stay in the game. Housel then draws a sharp distinction between getting rich and staying rich. Getting rich requires boldness, risk-taking, and optimism. Staying rich demands the opposite: humility, caution, and a healthy dose of fear. He tells the story of Jesse Livermore, the legendary stock trader who made the equivalent of $3 billion in a single day during the 1929 crash, only to lose everything a few years later and take his own life. Livermore was a genius at making money, but he never learned to protect it. Survival, Housel insists, is the foundation of all lasting wealth. If you avoid catastrophe, compounding can do the rest. This means holding cash, diversifying, and never betting the farm on a single outcome. Another counterintuitive idea is that most of your investments will fail, and that is perfectly fine. Housel calls this the power of tail events. Warren Buffett owned hundreds of stocks in his lifetime, but nearly all his wealth came from just 10 of them. The stock market's overall gains are driven by a tiny fraction of companies. The rest are mediocre or outright failures. The same pattern holds in business, art, and careers. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune if your few winners are big enough. The key is to keep taking reasonable shots and stay in the game long enough for those rare, explosive wins to appear. Perhaps the most profound argument in the book is that the highest dividend money pays is not a luxury car or a bigger house, but control over your time. Housel calls the ability to wake up and say, "I can do whatever I want today, with whom I want, for as long as I want," the highest form of wealth. Studies have consistently shown that a strong sense of controlling one's life is a more dependable predictor of well-being than income or status. Money's greatest gift is the freedom to walk away from a job you hate, to take a sabbatical, to spend a slow morning with your children. Every dollar you spend on impressing others is a dollar that cannot buy you that freedom. This connects directly to what Housel calls the man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving a Ferrari, you do not think, "Wow, that driver is so cool." You think, "Wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool." The admiration is not for the person. It is for the object, and it is really a projection of your own desires. We buy expensive things to signal status, but the audience is too busy thinking about themselves to be impressed. Real respect comes from kindness, humility, and character, not from a luxury watch. Building on this, Housel argues that true wealth is what you do not see. The person driving a $100,000 car may be deeply in debt. The person in a 10-year-old Honda may have millions quietly invested. Wealth is the money not spent, the cars not purchased, the upgrades declined. It is invisible, silent, and unglamorous. Spending money to show how much money you have is the fastest way to have less of it. The path to financial freedom is not about showing off. It is about choosing long-term peace over short-term praise. One of the most practical shifts Housel recommends is to save money without a specific goal. Most people save for a house, a car, or a vacation. But life is unpredictable. Saving just to save gives you flexibility, options, and the ability to handle surprises without panic. It is the gap between your ego and your income. When your lifestyle inflates as fast as your paycheck, you remain fragile. But when you keep your desires in check, You build a cushion that buys you time and choices. Housel also challenges the cult of cold rationality. He says aiming to be mostly reasonable works better than trying to be coldly rational. The mathematically optimal decision on a spreadsheet might be to invest rather than pay off a low-interest mortgage. But if being debt-free helps you sleep at night, that is the reasonable choice. Even Harry Markowitz, the Nobel laureate who created the perfect investment formula, split his own money 50-50 between stocks and bonds simply to avoid regret. The best financial plan is not the one that looks perfect on paper. It is the one you can stick with for decades, especially when markets crash and your emotions are screaming. The book then turns to the limits of history. Housel warns against the historian as prophet trap. The most important events in your financial life, wars, crashes, technological breakthroughs, are almost always unprecedented. The builders of the Fukushima nuclear plant designed a seawall to withstand the biggest tsunami in recorded history, but the 2011 wave was bigger. History teaches us that things that have never happened before happen all the time. Therefore, the goal is not to predict the future, but to prepare for it by building a margin of safety. If your financial plan only works when everything goes right, it is not a plan. It is a fantasy. A related psychological trap is the end of history illusion. We can clearly see how much we have changed in the past, but we assume we will stay the same from now on. The career you dream of at 22 may feel like a prison at 42. Housel advises avoiding extreme financial commitments and leaving room to adapt. Moderation in savings, working hours, and lifestyle expectations creates a life that can evolve with you, rather than locking you into a future version of yourself you have not even met yet. Investing, Housel reminds us, is never free. The price is not a visible fee. It is the stress, doubt, and fear you feel when your portfolio drops 30%. He suggests thinking of market volatility as a fee rather than a fine. Netflix returned over 35,000% between 2002 and 2018, but spent 94% of that time below its previous all-time high. To capture those gains, you had to endure constant discomfort. If you try to avoid that fee by timing the market, you often end up paying double in missed opportunities. Accepting the emotional cost is what allows you to stay invested long enough for compounding to work. Another crucial lesson is to know what game you are playing. The financial world is full of people with different goals, time horizons, and risk tolerances. A day trader chasing momentum is playing a completely different game than a retiree investing for income. When you copy someone else's moves without understanding their game, you inherit their risks without their context. Housel urges readers to define their own game, understand their own time horizon, and tune out advice that was not meant for them. The book also explores our psychological bias toward pessimism. Bad news grabs attention. Good news gets ignored. A forecast of a market crash sounds urgent and intelligent, while a prediction of steady long-term growth sounds naive. But over the long run, optimism has been the more accurate stance. The global economy has survived wars, recessions, and pandemics, and living standards have risen 20-fold over the last century and a half. Real optimism is not blind faith. It is expecting setbacks and still believing in long-term progress. If you let fear guide every decision, you will sell at the bottom and miss the recovery. Housel cautions against the seductive power of financial stories. We are wired to understand the world through narratives, and a compelling story can override hard data. Someone who got rich from crypto tells a clean, inspiring tale, but it omits the sleepless nights, the debt, and the sheer luck involved. We fall for appealing fictions, narratives that feel good but quietly mislead us. The antidote is to ask whether a story is supported by evidence or just by desire, and to remember that a good story is not a good strategy. In the final chapters, Housel gets personal. He shares his own financial confessions, not as a prescription, but as an illustration of principles applied to a real life. His primary goal is independence. He and his wife live well below their means, not because they are cheap, but because they value control over their time more than a bigger house. They paid off their mortgage early, even though the math said to invest the money, because being debt-free gave them peace of mind. They keep about 20% of their assets in cash, far more than most advisors recommend, because cash is like oxygen. It lets them breathe during a crisis without being forced to sell investments at the wrong time. He invests in low-cost index funds, saves consistently, and avoids complexity. His plan is simple, boring, and sustainable. Exactly the kind of plan that survives real life. The book is rich with memorable stories that bring these ideas to life. Ronald Read, the janitor who amassed $8 million, is the perfect embodiment of invisible wealth and the power of consistent saving. Bill Gates and Kent Evans illustrate how luck and risk can produce wildly different outcomes from similar starting points. Rajat Gupta's Fall from Grace is a cautionary tale about the insatiable hunger for more. Jesse Livermore's tragic arc shows that making a fortune and keeping it are entirely different skills. The man in the car paradox is illustrated by the valet who watched a Porsche owner eventually show up in a beat-up Honda after the car was repossessed. The flashy car was a mirage of wealth. The tech executive who threw gold coins into the ocean is a stark example of how intelligence does not protect you from self-destructive behavior. And the story of the dentist who pulled 16 teeth without consent in 1931 serves as a metaphor. Just as doctors now share options and let patients decide, financial advice must be tailored to the individual. There is no one-size-fits-all prescription. Despite its many strengths, the book is not without limitations. Some critics argue that it relies too heavily on anecdotes and storytelling rather than rigorous data. While the stories are powerful, they are not a substitute for empirical evidence, and a reader looking for a systematic, evidence-based guide to personal finance may be left wanting. The book's emphasis on behavior over technical knowledge is valuable, but it can also be taken too far. There are times when understanding the math of investing, taxes, and risk is essential. Housel's preference for reasonable over rational could be used to justify suboptimal financial decisions, such as holding excessive cash or paying off low-interest debt early, which over decades can cost significant wealth. Additionally, the book's focus on mindset and broad principles means it offers very little concrete step-by-step advice. For someone in deep debt or struggling to budget, the philosophical insights may feel insufficient. Finally, the heavy emphasis on luck and the unpredictability of the future might lead some readers to a kind of fatalism, underestimating the role of effort, skill, and deliberate planning. Housel himself would likely agree that these are not either-or propositions, but the balance can be tricky. Nevertheless, the practical takeaways from the book are both clear and actionable. First, define what enough means for you. Write it down, and when you reach it, protect it. Do not let comparison move the goalpost. Second, save money without a specific purpose. Treat savings as a tool for flexibility and peace of mind, not just a down payment on a future purchase. Third, build a margin of safety into every financial plan. Hold an emergency fund of at least 6 months of expenses, and assume your investment returns will be lower than historical averages so you save more and sleep better. Fourth, invest in low-cost index funds and give your money decades to compound. Time in the market beats timing the market. Fifth, accept that volatility is the price of admission for long-term returns. When the market drops, remind yourself that you are paying a fee, not receiving a fine. Sixth, Use money to buy control over your time. Before any major purchase, ask whether it brings you closer to freedom or just adds more payments. Seventh, stop trying to impress others with your stuff. No one is thinking about you as much as you think. They are thinking about themselves. Eighth, be reasonable, not just rational. Choose the financial strategy you can stick with, even if it is not mathematically perfect. Ninth, avoid extreme financial commitments that assume you will never change. Leave room for your future self to want different things. 10th, know what financial game you are playing and ignore advice from people playing a different game. Finally, cultivate a realistic optimism. The world is messy and unpredictable, but over the long arc, progress is the norm. Stay in the game. In the end, The Psychology of Money is not a book that will teach you how to pick stocks or optimize your tax return. It is a book that will change how you think about wealth, success, and happiness. Morgan Housel has written a deeply humane, story-driven exploration of the emotional side of money. Its greatest contribution is the permission it gives to be imperfect, to value peace of mind over bragging rights, and to recognize that the soft skills of patience, humility, and self-awareness are the true foundations of financial well-being. Whether you are just starting your career or already have a substantial portfolio, the lessons in this book will help you make better decisions, not by making you smarter, but by making you wiser about yourself. It is a quiet, profound, and ultimately hopeful read, one that deserves a place on the shelf of anyone who wants their money to serve their life, not the other way around.